What is up, Internet? Welcome to Self-Defense from All Angles, the podcast where we try to break the echo chamber around self-defense and self-protection. I'm your host, Randy King, speaker on all things proactive skills and owner and operator of 80/20 conflict management strategies. This week we have on the show Dag. Dag is a fascinating person. Number one, he's the host of the Fighter's Mind podcast, so he has lots of experience talking to lots of cool people. But Dag has gone through a very interesting transition from a very, very religious place to a less religious place, and he goes over all the areas of that journey. We had Dag on the Devil's Advocate podcast. Go check out his episode, but there was so much more I wanted to unpack about his history, leaving a very religious background. I would say bordering on a cult. It's not a cult technically, but bordering on, and he goes over some of the craziness that was implied when it comes to self-protection in there. Number one, spiritual armor being a major thing that people believed in. There's no need to protect yourself because your Lord will protect you. And there were people that very truly believe this, and I found that shocking. He also talks about how he tried to navigate those two worldviews, right? He wanted to be deeply pious, but also he wanted to protect himself and his family, and how those two thought processes, they clashed. And he talks about how he had to bridge those two things, which I, again, found fascinating. He also talks about his experiences leaving religion and some of the bad things and the good things that happened in that space, which then led to his Patreon story. Of course, as always, patreon.com/RandyKingLive for extra content, the one-up. In the Patreon story, this is one of the first stories where somebody actually said they were the bad guy in the story. So Dag goes over a story where he was not great and how his leaving religion made him swing very far in another direction. So I loved how honest he was, how open he was to all the questions that I asked. And I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. And don't forget, if you're looking for a speaker to talk on proactive self-protection skills or someone to come into your workplace and help train your staff on the realities of workplace violence, don't forget to get a hold of us at 8020cms.com. Now let's get on to the show. What is up, Internet? Welcome to Self-Defense from All Angles, my new self-defense podcast where we talk to people who have experienced violence in multiple different ways, not just self-defense instructors. We're trying to break the echo chamber of self-defense podcasts where it's just experts talking to experts, and we're trying to talk to people who actually have a little bit more real-world experience. Today, I am very excited to be interviewing my friend Dag, because Dag has a crazy tale that we touched on in a bonus piece of content for the Devil's Advocate. Came on for the debate, but the story after was way more important. So I'm really excited we can do an interview style show with him. So let's welcome to the show, Dag, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I was a bit surprised that I was asked for a second show. Like that's like the first time it's happened. So yeah, I'm honored. Well, humble.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Your story is so interesting and compelling, and I think people need to know more about this, especially with certain things that happened in the United States recently. So first off, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Well, my name's Dag, dog, whatever. Not dog. Somebody's called me Doug once, but I live in the southern part of Norway. I'm 34. I will turn 35 this year. I'm a father of a daughter. She's 5.5 almost. Yeah, so I'm teaching her some self-defense. She's mixed Norwegian Filipino, so I'm Filipino. So I'm teaching her some of her stuff, some Filipino martial arts.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, she needs to learn how to protect herself. That's important for me. If I can be the protector, she needs to be able to protect herself. So
100%.
And besides that, got a full-time job, and then I just started my psychology studies this year in January. So I'm done with the first semester.
Nice.
And I'm working on some anti-bullying stuff as well. Yeah,
that's awesome. And you also hosted a podcast called The Fighter's Mindset.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's right. I do that. Well, I put it on hold for now because I got to work on I have to work on some other stuff. So yeah, I'm getting free. So I'm making the words, but I'm just excited.
No worries. So, Dag, the question we ask everybody first is, what is your definition of self-defense?
Ooh, well, since I have a pretty interesting background from church.
Yes, we will talk about that for sure.
Yeah. Well, well, for me, it's important that I can take care of myself at first, more or less. Yeah.
Right. So this next part of the show, we always ask, what do you wish people knew more about? But I really want to dive into your church experience. So we first got a hold of each other because me and Rory were doing a tour and you wanted to bring us on the show. And we did a show together, which was awesome. We had a great time, became fast friends after it. And you had you have a story that's your self-defense journey, I think, is different than a lot of people's. And I think it's very poignant to what is happening in the world right now, which is, church and state kind of bleeding over. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about, how you came out of this church situation and came into a self-defense mindset? Because if I remember correctly, self-defense was not a priority when you were in church.
Yeah, that's right. So when I was, oh my God, I'm using the word oh my God now in another way that I used it before. Right. So I've changed my whole vocabulary. Well, I was a part of a church for 20 years. So I'm celebrating a 3 years anniversary, breaking out of it this year.
Woo!
Yeah. Woo. That's been some of a journey. And after I left the church, I could finally be myself and think clearly about myself. And if I'm ever in a situation where I need to protect myself, I can't rely on higher forces or a God. So the thing with being a Christian and having the mindset of that and mixing it with self-defense and the reality, it was different because I think I was more like hyper sensitivity alert, always color, I don't know, orange, red, almost like jumpy.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's for weird. The listeners at home, there is a list of things called Cooper's color codes, because the point of this podcast is more of an entry-level podcast for people getting into self-defense. So Cooper's color codes state there's different levels of awareness, and he assigns a color to them. White being totally chill at home, yellow being slightly aware, which is where people should be normally. Then it goes orange and red. So what Dag is saying is, because of his experiences, he was living in a higher, more paranoid state. Yes? Yeah,
so being more paranoid because is there danger around next corner? Will God protect me? And that was like,
right.
And the two parts couldn't quite merge together because that was wrong. Okay, wrong. I would say wrong. And it's made everything difficult because I was supposed to believe in God that he will protect me, whatever. And I heard stories about people getting shot, but they survived. The bullets were like falling off them.
Right.
And it's some hobo mumbo jumbo from Africa where they love this crazy stuff. Yeah. And I even heard a preacher from the town I was born in and raised. There's a big like international missions organization, and the preacher, when he was in his teens, he wanted to punch him, but then he said that God came from above and smacked him with his hand, and the guy fell. And people believe in that. It's like
that is wild to me. People's belief structures are always interesting. So would you say effectively that the stance your church took, first of all, what denomination were you in?
Pentecostal. So typically like Hillsong and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So you were in a Pentecostal church, and the general rule of the church was outsource your safety to God. So you don't need to worry about self-defense yourself. God will take care of you. And you were filled with stories of bullets falling off and God striking people down from the heavens.
Yeah, people being protected from this and that. And yeah, so I was being like kind of jumpy, unsecure because of I started training some martial arts when I was a teenager, and then I moved around to Denmark. But still, I was also part of the church, and even people, they didn't like, how to say, being physical in church. Like, right. I think it's okay for the man, for the husband to punish his wife. I mean, like that's totally okay. But when it comes to protecting, like I even asked my friends, like, hey, I want to learn, like, can I teach you some self-defense? What if, and they were like, well, he will make sure that I can punch a guy from out of nowhere.
That's so, it's interesting. But it's so, and I don't want to pigeonhole just Christianity with this. This kind of thinking occurs in almost all cultures. You mentioned your daughter is Filipina, half Filipino. Yeah. There is a concept of anting, which is tattoos that would magically protect you from blades and sticks and swords. So this isn't a purely Pentecostal view, but you felt it was very enforced. How did the church respond to you training in self-defense and martial arts? Were they upset? Was it okay?
It was frowned upon.
Really?
So I had my exes, they were all like, The first girlfriend I had, she didn't bother because I wasn't training much. But then the other ones I had, they were more like, oh, you shouldn't do this because it's not good. It's bad for you. You should leave. You should stop. Like, they didn't want to train it. And even church, like my good bandmate for years, he told me, you're being so violent, dog. Why are you so violent? And
Right.
yeah. So you like bros, they punch each other in the stomach for just fun. But when I did this, he was like, why are you being so violent? Like, where does this violence come from? And so, as I mentioned, the girlfriends I had, sounds like I've had a lot, but anyways, they said like, you should stop doing that because it's not good for you. It's bad for you.
So did they believe it was bad for you, like spiritually or mentally?
Yes,
or
spiritually. And I also felt that, like, since I was learning just self-defense, listening to Tim Larkin's book, so it made me more like a jumpy guy and insecure, and I couldn't quite, I was working as a bouncer and I couldn't quite cope with this, like, spiritual, like Jesus and all that stuff, and looking after myself, like what would happen if I went in a situation.
that must be very hard for you to rectify.
Yeah.
Being a bouncer and seeing with your own eyes the violence that's happening, because no matter what, there's going to be people punching each other when they're drinking. That just happens. So with the change in like what you believe and what you're seeing were obviously very different things. And you're hearing things from like Larkin, for example. Now, Larkin would be the other side of the fence, I would say, from like the Pentecostal church sounds like outsource your safety to Jesus. Yeah. And Larkin's like, everybody's going to kill you. Learn how to kill faster. Right. So it's kind of a yin yang situation there.
Oh, very, yeah. And what I did before, I was living in Trondheim. So it's like one of the third or fourth biggest cities. The second, I think it's the third largest city in Norway. Okay. And I was working as a bouncer outside. So what I did, I was listening to his book while I went to work, and then I was praying. And then I was praying to God, keep my mind sound and blah blah blah, and protect me. And I was like, and I felt even more scared because, like, what am I gonna do if I end up in a situation? Because I trained martial arts, so I can handle myself. That was the thought I had, and then I believed that God, he will protect me through all this. And I was like, some weird shit.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a different worldview for sure. With you working as a bouncer in security, how did the church respond to that? Were they okay with you working in security, but not okay with using physical violence?
Well, my ex, she wasn't okay with it, like,
right.
Not at all, but like nothing was okay. So it's and I of course I was being safe in, like, per se, like working in a shopping mall, but of course there could be some guys with needles and stuff, and I would swear to my bulletproof vest and all that stuff, and still I would believe that God would protect me no matter what.
So this was drilled into you pretty young, because you said you were in the church for how long?
20 years, from I was about 12.
From 12 20. Years old to 20 to 32.
Yeah, 32. So that was
And this is during your formative years. So this is when your brain is, the neocortex, the frontal lobe, doesn't really finish forming until 23 to 26. So you're in this environment where violence is, well, according to the church, and I want to get into that a little bit, is wrong, right? Is it very turn the other cheek? Was that kind of the
turn the other cheek, no matter what. And I don't know if they had this, like, there was a documentary called Fight Church, where we had pastors fighting in the ring.
Fight Church?
Yeah.
How have I not seen this? Fight Church. Okay, sorry, keep going. I want to watch this now.
I can do a recording of it. I have done. It's impossible to buy now because they took it off, but I'll see if I can fix it for you. But
if you could send me Fight Church, that would be my favorite. That'd be my favorite day. I would just watch Fight Church. Anyways, keep going. So there's this thing called Fight Church.
And then, like, when I saw this one, I was like, hey, I like this, and I reached out to the guys, and I became friends with the guys because I said, like, hey, I want to start this stuff in Norway. I want to create my own fight church. Right. I was at this point, and that was wrong as well, because you have the masculinity. And once I did a discussion on my Facebook wall years ago. I think it was 2016, 17, and a lot of the people from my church, they were all like, "What's wrong with you, dog? Why are you being so toxic?" Like, so it was frowned upon. Yeah.
You were saying earlier that it was not okay, but less frowned upon to discipline, quote unquote, your wife than it was for you to learn how to defend yourself against another human being.
Yes, to turn your other cheek. Yeah, that was what it told us.
So you get this when you're a teenager.
Yeah, as well, it started when I was a bit like adult, but well, maybe I was around 19, well, 20. I went to Bible college when I was 18, but like in the like early adulthood, I would say, yeah.
So in early adulthood, you got really deep into it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, martial arts or church. Well, yeah, after I went to Bible college, yeah, everything started to go wrong, like depression and so on, but that's another story.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to get to next is like, how hard was it for you to bring these two worlds together in your head? Because it sounds like there was no place where you were doing the right thing, right? So in one of the places you were learning how to use the tool of force, aka violence, to protect yourself in a situation. And obviously righteously, you weren't looking to pick fights. You weren't looking to bully anybody. So here you're learning this, but in your head, you're hearing, turn the other cheek, this is wrong. And then you're in church and then you're like, okay, they're saying this thing, but I've seen or I've done something different. How hard was it for you to navigate that? You mentioned some depression. Was that because of this?
And that was like because my bringing up and stuff, but it was like the depression finally took off 3 years ago. Well, depression, all this like struggle, because there was a lot of struggle going on inside my head, and I like was thinking like it's the devil who's trying to torment me, and I haven't been a good enough Christian. I haven't paid enough tithings and offerings and so on. And then I trained martial arts on top of it. So it's like learning to protect myself, and I got more into it. Like, but it was very difficult. Yeah.
Why do you think the church was so against you learning how to protect yourself?
I think it was more like my ex-girlfriends, and they said like, you shouldn't do this, you should study your Bible more, and you should leave this martial arts stuff and blah blah blah. And even going to church, like if I mention something about self-defense courses, telling my friends they should learn to protect themselves, and ask them, what are you going to do if somebody breaks into your house? Right. Are you just going to stand there? And they're more like, oh, that's never going to happen because God protects me. And all of the guys, like I know, they're like, there's even guys but they love to watch action movies, gore movies, like with lots of violence. That's okay once somebody's getting beaten up by a hammer, like that's okay with all that stuff. But when it comes to like personal protection, it's not okay. And I don't know why.
So I want to be very clear then. So you were feeling more of the pressure from the community, not necessarily from the elders of the church and the people in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the community of people. So the church wasn't against you training. It was the people that went to the church that said you shouldn't be doing this.
Like in general, like, well, they knew that I was into martial arts, but none really bothered to say anything because they were like shaking their heads and like, so the community was, a tough one. Yeah.
So it was the people who were in charge didn't really approve of it, but then just kind of shook their heads and let you do your thing. But you found that the people, the support structure you had, the thing that's supposed to keep you the safest, they were very against it. So they thought that this training was toxic. They thought it was violent. They thought it was making you a bad person. Was there anything else that they were against for this? Like, was it why training? Why is this the thing that was toxic? Why was it evil? Because you were turning away from God? Or was it because you believe in the power of him? Or like, what was the real issue? Like, you seem like a very chill dude. I don't think it was a personality thing, right? So what was the friction?
I think it's, well, I've always been into like Eastern philosophy and all this.
Oh, okay.
And then they call this, I remember I had when I was a younger kid, I was listening to some soundtrack from Romeo Must Die. And then I had some nightmare. And then somebody said like, maybe you should listen to some, I'm not quite sure, but I think they said you should listen to some godly music instead before you fall asleep. And that was, I believe that it was like the devil or whatever. And they call, you should not like the 10 commandments. Like one of the first commandments is like, you should, like God is the only God, you shouldn't have any other God. So, and they call it, I'm not sure for the English word of it, but it's like, not the right God.
Right.
I'm not sure about the correct translation of it.
So they didn't like because it's very hard to escape the Eastern philosophy when it comes to martial arts, especially if you're taking a traditional art. There's going to be Eastern stuff. There's going to be Tao symbols. There's going to be Japanese Zen. It's just going to happen. You're going to meditate, etc. So that was some of the issues that they had, was the philosophy of the art, not just the physical part. Yeah.
So like, well, they're talking a lot in church about like God will protect us and from this and that and from everything. And it's so that was what like, because it had been instilled in my mind, and that was like affecting me whenever I was doing something that I enjoyed, like with martial arts or self-protection, protecting myself. And so I was I was very insecure because of all this, because of the church stuff. And then it's so important to protect myself. And now I have a daughter. It's even more important that I can teach her to protect herself.
Right. It's just
Yeah.
wild to me that they would like outsource that protection to the deity, right? It's just, like I said, it exists in all cultures, isn't uniquely Christian, but it is an issue because what happens when these people are attacked, if something happens, right? Maybe it won't, most of them are going to go through their whole lives, nothing happening.
Yeah.
But if something does happen, like you said, what can they do, right? If their daughter's attacked, things are changing, the world is shifting. You just had your first attack on your country's soil, right?
Yeah, from an extremist last week. And some of my colleagues, they were supposed to go to the pub where it happened,
right?
And then they had an acquaintance, and I asked my uncle, "Are you okay?" After, because he used, like, he's in this, like, I don't know what you call it, like, that's his thing. He loves to be in this kind of bars, but
okay,
he's a gay, but I love my uncle, and like,
right.
Of course. So I just asked him, "Are you okay?" And I told my sister, "I'm in Oslo. I've been working at this festival, but I'm okay. So you don't worry." So
right.
Yeah, but like, still, and people say like, "Oh, good thing I'm not a gay," or like blah blah blah, because God protects me. That's like in whatever, like, God will protect me, and that was what I believe. And
so there's three. So this is kind of falling onto victim blaming a little bit, and there's like three. I say there's three different areas of victim blaming. So victim blaming, one is the world is just and people get what they deserve. That sounds like what these people are saying, right? Is, if they would have followed the Bible, if they would have done this, then they wouldn't have been there. They wouldn't have got hurt because God would have protected them.
Yeah, there's do you remember the incident on this island, Utøya, 2011, the guy who went nuts with a machine gun?
No, tell me about that.
There was this crazy guy. He had some ideological Christian values stuff, and he went on this island where there were a lot of teenagers, political. First he did the bombings in Oslo, and then he went to the island. And right. there was a right after this incident, there was a pastor from the area where I was living in. He said, like, "Well, this is God's way of judging what happened. Like, it's God. It was God who did this for real." Yeah, he said, and yeah.
So they very much believe in the Old Testament vengeful God, not the New Testament kind of chill God. This guy is like pillars of salt, raining fire. He's going to send gunmen to kill people if they don't follow the proper path.
Yeah.
Do you think that was a fear tactic to keep people engaged in the church?
Maybe. Well, I would say that he got some highly mental, like, issues.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, the pastor that was saying this is God's judgment. Do you think that's a fear tactic?
It made to the local newspapers and some of the Christian newspapers as well.
It's wild. So, Dag, what was the final straw? What made you leave this church?
All of this, like, lies and bullshit, and to see how the people really are when it comes to, because I moved away, and then the way that people are, like, talking behind my back, and I know they are, and I asked them, I was in a Christian rock band, and it's like, people didn't reach out to me, and they knew I was going through some hard times when my ex, the mother of my daughter, when she left me, and I had to say, like, I knew that they were talking bad about me, and they were like, we need to stay, like, not stay away from him. But yeah, the final straw were, like, to see the people, the people's real intents and the way they're treating people in general. And also I had enough of this, like, some, what is called, exorcism stuff. It's
okay.
Like, because of, like, mental issues, and there are some people, they want to, like, do this exorcism stuff on me, and I was like, hell no, I had enough of this. Yeah.
So they thought because you were thinking a little bit differently, or you had some, like, depression issues that you needed, that was a physical demon they needed to exorcise.
Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. So it was like, in general, I was like, all the lies and too much judgmental talking and sin and stuff, and just to see the people, and even that people don't want to learn how to protect themselves, because, like, it was such an important part of me. I want to, like, help people, like, teach self-defense to some of the church guys and so on. So it's like a big ball of mix with all this stuff. That was the final draw for me. Yeah.
How hard was it on you to leave that community? So we talk about self-defense, and we say, especially me, I say the boundaries and community are the two most important things, and then everything else kind of comes secondary. How difficult was it to leave that support structure, that community? Because, like you said, you went from in the group to out of the group. They clearly have a very strong in-group versus out-of-group. In-group is protected by God. Everybody else is being judged by God.
Yeah.
So when you moved to this out-group, you mentioned they were talking behind your back. Obviously, it was hard to keep those ties. When you jumped, did you have another support structure to jump to, or did you just go out on your own?
Well, to quote Fleetwood Mac,
right?
You can go your own way. So that was like, yeah. So I went my own way, and it was difficult as hell. And then I remember when I told my psychologist, he would he fell out of his chair and said like, finally, I've been meaning to tell you like you should leave the church because it's only breaking you.
Right.
So yes, and I have a small like a small support pillar to lean on. It's not that big, but it's solid and it's real. Yeah.
That's amazing. If you don't mind, could you share some of the biggest challenges of leaving the church? Because this really, why I wanted to talk to you about this is you're not the only person experiencing this, and you've got through it successfully, and a lot of people don't. So do you have any tips maybe to tell the listeners if they are thinking about leaving a place that's not helping them grow, what they could do to make the transition easier?
They can reach out to me and I will like talk with them.
Sure. That's great.
Yeah. That's then get out and like go out, find a bar or something to just like live your life. And I spent like months after I left the church, like living life and catching up with my like being 18, you can buy alcohol, being 20 years old, you can buy alcohol. But I wouldn't say like do it all the time, but like just live your life, go out to dance but finding someone, especially if it's like, for me, the church, that was like my family, and my other family, like they told me to stay away from him. So that was like, but that's another story as well. But leaving, it's difficult. It will be difficult, of course. It will take time for sure, because I've had some points where I was thinking, do I want to go back to church? And I was like, hell no, I'm not going back at all.
Right.
So yeah, to relapse. Yeah, you will have. Yeah, I think it's called relapse. Yeah.
Interesting. Calling it a relapse. Going back to church as a relapse is a phrase I've never heard before, but it makes total sense.
Yeah.
So you kind of went through almost like a Rumspringer, like the Amish do, right? Where they let their kids go away for a year and they can live up their life. I don't know if you know about this tradition. It's maybe
for everybody. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
but they get 1 year Rumspringer where they get to go and do all the things they should do. And then if they want to come back, then they come back. If they don't, they don't. And so you kind of did your own Rumspringer. You kind of just went out and lived life. Did the on and off switch from super pious to party boy, did that put you in some situations you didn't think you were going to be in? Did that was it a little dangerous? Like what happened? Did you overindulge? Did you make some mistakes?
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, I wasted all, like I was supposed to save some money, but I spent it all on my like therapy, drinking, and the first few nights the first weeks or weekends when I went out like every weekend, I was talking loud about this and like I was crying and that made it. But I've learned from my mistakes. As like now I can do mistakes, and so. But I've been thinking about like I went on this Clubhouse. It was last year. There was just like this new thing during lockdown, Clubhouse, where live podcast stuff.
Right.
So I was talking about a bit about this, and I've been thinking about like setting up some support group for those, like make a manual, like a welcome gift when you leave church. Like this is what you should do. This is what you should try to do, but of course within reasons. Of course, if the church has been the whole life for you, of course it's difficult. But for me, it was either continue to be a slave or being in a prison, to quote one of my good friends, and told me like this friend of mine told me, I like you better now as a non-Christian than when you were a Christian. I
already see the hate comments on this video. So to get ahead of those a little bit, not saying that all Christianity is bad. It's just this church for sure had some red flags. My daughter just got confirmed. She's Lutheran, apparently. I'm not religious at all, but her mom is a little bit. They're Lutheran. My daughter decided that she wanted to do that journey. And I think there is some good stuff in the Christianity that gives good ethics and morals, etc.
Of course.
What do you think are the biggest red flags? So let's say somebody joins a group, because I don't even know if all Pentecostal churches are bad, but definitely the one you were at was a problem.
Yeah.
So what are some of the red flags that people should look out for when they're in these groups, like controlling language or signs from a pastor, or is there anything you could think of that people could look for maybe when they're searching out a spiritual path?
I would not recommend to mention that like well, I was watching porn. So
Right.
whenever I had sinned, I went to my pastors and they said like, well, this is not good. Like, and the judgmental cap is on, and they're dragging you down even further and further, and like they're more like pulling you down. So I think that's like, if you watch porn, they just keep on doing it. Well, I'm not saying that's good. But like, that's, I don't know what to say, but I would not share the whole life, because they can find a way to like say that we're going to pray for you. So when we pray for you, everything will be okay. They have some manipulative ways. Yeah.
So pay attention to that. And I think it's a hard line to walk between being individualistic and being communal, right? So like, what is good for you might not be good for the group, and what you do that's good for the group, and what you do that's good for yourself. And that's such a hard line to walk. And I think it sounds like to me, and obviously correct if I'm wrong, it sounds like to me they wanted you to squish your individuality and just be a communal person. They didn't want you to have any independent thoughts or actions. They just wanted you to be a cohesive part of the group.
Yeah, precisely. So I'm a guitar player. I was only important whenever I was playing under like church days, the Sundays, and whenever I wasn't playing, it was more like, oh, we miss you, dog. It's so good, like when you're here playing. But besides that, so that was one of the main reasons why I left, because I don't want to be pushed into anything. I don't want to be misused.
Right.
Yeah. So like that's that's another like a red flag to be on lookout, if they're making you feel bad. So it's like a manipulative, narcissistic way of saying things. Like, it's like, your problem. Well, you're not here playing with us. Like, why should we bother? It's your fault.
Right.
Like, blame. Yeah.
So lots of guilt. That's a very traditional way to.
Yeah, guilt. I mean,
guilt.
Guilt. Yeah, precisely, guilt. Yeah.
So you said we're almost out of time. So you said you were thinking about like creating some resources and a manual and things to look for. What would be the most important thing? What is the most important thing you would put in that manual?
I would say like, I would put like something saying you're brave. You did it. You like that's right. A statement. Like, you did it. You should be proud of yourself because you did it. Because right. Leaving is difficult, because you have a typical thing, maybe in Norway, I don't know, or wherever, you have people they drink too much, and then they find Jesus, but like, I went the other way. So I left, I had Jesus, and then I found alcohol. So like,
right. But you found a happy medium now in between the
two.
Right? You're in school, you're doing well, you see your daughter.
Yeah. So if it hadn't been for me leaving, I wouldn't have it as it is today. Yeah. Right.
And you're happier. You believe you're happier now than you would have been if you continued.
Yeah, I am.
That's
100%.
awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Dag, thank you so much for sharing this. I think it's super important because, like I said, I'm not saying everybody should leave organized religion. I'm saying that some of them might not be in your best interest, and you should know this. So we'll follow up with you if you do create this manual, if you do have a thing. And like Dag said, if you want to reach out, he can chat with you about this. Other than that, I think that's it for this episode. We're going to jump over to the one-up, which is the story that you tell that makes you the coolest person at the table, or a life lesson you want to share with people. We're going to get to that in a second. That'll be on patreon.com/RandyKingLive, $5 level. Check that out. All the content is there, as well as every other podcast I've ever done is on that as well. So you can check all that out if you're missing old formats. Dag, how can the people get a hold of you?
They can find me through my podcast, Fighter Mindset Podcast.
Right, check that out. He had
Instagram,
me on, which makes it official. It's a real podcast now that I've been on it. I'm just kidding.
80 episodes.
Yeah. 80, right?
Yeah.
That's so many episodes. Who have you had on the show other than
me? Richard Dimitri, of course, Tim Larkin.
Awesome.
Mark McYoung. Yeah. Tim, some cool Norwegian guys. Yeah.
That's awesome. So it'd be great if you want to expand your knowledge. Like, there isn't just 8 people teaching self-defense that all are white dudes. Like, it looks like that on the internet. It's like Blower, Larkin, Richard, Rory, me. Like, it's all these just like white dudes. There's tons of people teaching stuff, as you've heard on this podcast. Episode 1 of my podcast, we had an amazing firearms instructor on who had a very different take on self-defense. So you guys should all check that out. Thank you so much, Dag, for your time. We're going to jump over to Patreon. Don't forget to do all the internet things: like, share, subscribe, leave a review. If you could leave a review, that does so much to populate this podcast. So jump onto wherever you listen to us, leave a review. That's going to help more listeners get to this show. And we'll talk to you all next week.